Hi, Nikita.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I am, life just keeps happening. I'm starting to take some comfort in the idea that it's not going to at some point. I'm good.
Okay. I'm glad you're good. So let me introduce this. I'm Robert Wright, publisher of the Non-Zero newsletter. This is a Non-Zero podcast. You're Nikita Petrov, publisher of the Psychopolitica newsletter, which coincidentally is a word that appears immediately in your background. I wonder how that happened. You've got the whole URL there, psychopolitica.substack.com.
You might,
I'm worried.
Since this is going to be a split screen, people might not see it.
I had worried that the many years of communism in your homeland had maybe snuffed out all self-promotional instincts, but no, you seem equipped to thrive in a capitalist economy. Anyway, you are you used to work with me at Non-Zero. You currently work with Glenn Lowry at the Glenn Show, and you do all your own stuff on Psychopolitica. You're still in Armenia, I gather, having grown up in Russia. And right. we're going to talk about Substack Notes, this new feature that some people say is a rival to Twitter. Some people say it's not. In any event, I think it has tremendous promise, and so much promise that I wanted to devote the whole conversation to it. I know you have written on Substack Notes about some changes that you think would be valuable to the way it works and its interface. I have some ideas of my own. And I guess one reason I think this is worth a whole conversation is that it's not that often that you have the possibility of like a whole new significant social media platform emerging. I mean, Elon Musk has provided opportunities for this a few times. Not intentionally, I think, but he's gotten people to get, enthusiastic for a while about Mastodon. That has its complications, although it has a kind of potential of its own. Substack has particular resources it can bring to this. And I thought this from the very beginning. And I'm seeing in notes that it's the case, which is just that Substack has a lot of people who have newsletters with non-trivial followings. Some of them, I think that includes us. Some people have huge followings, the Matt Iglesias and Andrew Sullivans of the world. And, these people are showing up on Notes. It's not that easy to build a new social media platform. And all of a sudden a bunch of people you've heard of and who have a lot of influence on social media and in culture broadly show up. And I think that's one reason this has a huge amount of potential. Now, I have my own ideas about how it could fail to realize its potential and what it could do to more fully realize it. And there's kinds of two dimensions of that. One is just how do you make sure it's this big, robust thing that a lot of people are engaging in and a lot of important contributors to the conversation are engaging in. And then the other dimension is, can we make it a more civil and constructive place than a lot of other social media things? Okay, so that's my set of considerations. And I'll just say right now, along the first dimension, it seems to be possible to follow people. That's something I'm going to get back to, but I think one of the main things they need to do is make it easier to just follow people on Notes without necessarily subscribing to a newsletter. I'll explain later why I think that is a huge, huge issue. Apparently, it is kind of doable now, we think. It's a very obscure function, and I'm not even sure it's working for me. But anyway, I think they've done a great job of getting this thing off the ground. Yep. There's huge potential. Now, you wrote a thing on Notes that got a certain amount of attention. Beautifully illustrated, like so much of your stuff. Did you do the art, or was that your collaborator?
This is Georgios Terzakis, a Greek artist. that has worked with me for Psychopolitica.
Okay. And you, what would you say was your overarching goal in that contribution?
Well, I started writing this before I knew that Notes was in the works. I started writing, they unveiled the web interface for chat. And I thought chat had a lot of promise, but it wasn't realizing it. And I started writing on chat, my feedback on that. And then like 2 days later, they unveiled Notes, which is very similar. My feeling about chat was that it's getting Substack very close to what Telegram is. And Telegram is huge in Russia, both in terms...
Should we stop and explain what chat is? I have not made use of it, but it's a little different from, one thing any of us on Substack can do is send out an issued newsletter that has a comment thread at the bottom. We can choose to confine that to paid subscribers, open to all subscribers, whatever. That's a place you can have a conversation. Explain how the chat function, which I haven't made use of, is different from that.
So it's in a different place. It's either on the app or on the web in a different tab. The idea is that you don't write long articles there. You just start a conversation, a little thread. And then comments appear under that thread that you started. So each message that you post as an author, the ones that start the conversation, they are themselves a little post. And then there are comments underneath that. I think the idea is this is for a more rapid kind of conversation, shorter messages, an ongoing kind of thing. I think the interface has its flaws that made it, not. I think there needs to be work done for it to become a properly successful thing. And then with the unveiling of the Notes, there is not a lot of difference between them. I think you need to delineate more and make it clear, why, when you go to the one place, when you go to the other place. Right now, my understanding is Substack stance is chat is for a more private conversation. This is just for your subscribers. Notes is a more shared space, which I think doesn't make a lot of sense, because if that's the difference, then you should be able to just write a note that is subscriber only, or you write a note that is for everybody. If that's the only difference, that's how you make that difference, easy to exploit. But I think with a few tweaks, chat can become a very important part of what Substack offers.
Okay. Maybe we should talk a little about the structure of Substack Notes for people who have spent either little or no time there. And I'll explain why I think does have this great potential, even to really eat into Twitter's mind share, which isn't to say, it's going to be a Twitter killer or that's their aspiration, because I don't think that is their aspiration. Substack publishers get a lot of, some of them get a lot of traffic from Twitter. There's a certain kind of symbiosis now between Substack and Twitter, and I don't think there's any great aspiration to kill that off. But I think one thing we should say is that although you said chat is in many ways like Notes, I think what you mean is opening up a chat is a lot like, posting a note and opening that up for conversation. But still, there is a very big difference between being in someone's chat and being on Substack Notes, right? Because that's much more like being on Twitter, where you can tap into a lot of different conversations if you're there. You can tap into a lot of different notes, which roughly correspond to tweets. And so, being on Substack Notes is much more like being on Twitter than like being in someone's chat. And that's, I think it's great virtue. From Substack's point of view, I think one thing it does is expose you to a bunch of Substack publishers. And okay, so here's one difference that I think is smart. Difference between Notes and Twitter is that, on Twitter, this weird hierarchy kind of evolved where a blue check was a godlike status, and then there was everyone else. The blue check had started out as just a way to verify that people who might be subject to, imitation are the real them, right? But then it became the status thing. And it was kind of arbitrary, like who gets it, who doesn't. Substack has one of the 3 columns you can choose when you go there. Twitter has its for you and following verticals. Substack has 3. One is home. I forget what the second one actually says, but the one I want to talk about is, and the third one is bestsellers. That's the status hierarchy, kind of, right? I mean, because those are people with one of 3 kinds of checks in there. A white check means you have at least 100 paid subscribers to your newsletter. An orange check, which is what I have, means you have at least 1,000 paid subscribers. And paid is all that matters in this, assignment of badges. And then there's the purple check, which almost nobody has, but it means you have more than 10,000 paid subscribers, paid. I think it totally makes sense that they have this thing there because for one thing, that encourages.
So let me interrupt.
Yeah. Do I have that wrong, do you think, or?
Let me interrupt you. I think you might. I think the third tab, the bestsellers, is something that only people who were invited to Notes before it was made public have.
Oh my God.
It's a bit of an Easter egg. So when this was in pilot, there was a tab that just had everybody who is on Notes, which obviously can't scale. Once you have a lot of people, it becomes way too crowded. Right. So I think they changed it to bestsellers and only kept it for users who had been in the pilot.
So
that's my understanding. I don't have that tab. I used to have it like one morning and then it disappeared.
Oh man. So what 3 tabs do you have?
I only have 2. The home and subscribe. Mm-hmm.
Let me just say, I think if they're getting rid of this tab, it's a mistake. Because this is an incentive for the people who have followings on Substack to show up, Like if you're Matt Iglesias and you know that there's this one column everyone's going to go to, and you're going to be one of the few people with a purple badge,
club kind of, yeah.
That's an incentive to post on Substack Notes. And even, and my having an orange badge, if it makes me more visible, is an incentive for me to post. Now, obviously, you want a lot of people to post, but right now, what I think one of their competitive advantages is that they can give people like Andrew Sullivan and Matt Iglesias and Casey Newton with big followings online to show up. And, I suppose what they can say is, well, we're going to give them this big algorithmic advantage. But this leads to another sermon of mine. It's like I don't think people like opaque algorithms. We want to be able to control. This takes me to the follower question. I want to be able to say, I'm following these people. I'm not going to subscribe to all their newsletters. You can only subscribe to so many newsletters, even if you don't pay for them. I don't want, and I want to know that I go here and I see these people. I want to emphasize that's not the same as saying that you should emulate the rest of the Twitter follower ecosystem. I don't think it's a good idea to advertise how many followers someone has. It may not even be a good idea for them to know how many followers they have or who their followers are. I think the whole thing should be rethought because I think a lot of that has led to bad behavior. The obsession with building up your following has led to a lot of tribal tweeting and preaching to the choir tweeting and isn't the other tribe a bunch of shitheads and all of that stuff. So when I say they definitely should make a, well, if there is a way to follow people now, they should make it a lot more apparent. I'm not saying they should turn the follower count into this sacred object the way it is on Twitter. I think they should rethink all that stuff. But you should be able to control your feed. And right now, that's either impossible or hard. And I personally, if I were them, I would say we don't do algorithms. That's a difference between us and everybody else. You completely control your experience. That's what people want. They're sick of algorithms. And that's why they need something like a bestseller tab, because they need to give the the people with huge followings of the world and the people with medium followers and some followers, they need to give their publishers, they should privilege their Substack publishers. I think the bestseller tab should still be there, whatever you want to call it. And maybe it should take into account not just paid subscriptions, but unpaid, but whatever. But they need to incentivize those people to stay there and even engage in conversation and not just use it as a publicity outlet for their latest post, which is good, but it's not. You'd rather have them engaged there, spending some time there instead of Twitter.
So I think, first off, I think a lot of this is ironing out the kinks.
Sure.
They're iterating quickly, they're changing it, and they're trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. I have been in conversation with the Substack team about some of this, and this piece that I wrote that you alluded to, I called it Towards the Substack Civil Society, has some suggestions on that, and I got some positive feedback on the suggestions that I had. And relating to the question that you're bringing up, I had two. One, I think the minimal thing that has to happen is it needs to be very clearly and exhaustively explained how the home tab works, like what goes into that tab. Just like bullet point. It's people who you subscribe to. It's people who are recommended by people you subscribe to. It's notes that had received replies from people you subscribe to. Whatever the structure is, that needs to be written out and explained. And I think they're going to do that. At least some of the people on the team said that they would. And I think the reason they haven't done that is because it's not yet set in stone. They are tweaking it and figuring out how it should work. That's one thing. The other thing is a suggestion I made that also received positive feedback, which is what I would like to see is an ability to create my own filters. So let's say there's a home tab, which works a way that the Substack team designed it to work. There's the subscribed feed, which is just the people that I chose to subscribe to. And then I want another button that allows me to create another tab that will work the way I want it to work. It may be people who are recommended by people I subscribe to. It may be people who read my newsletter. It may be a specific list of newsletters, like lists on Twitter work. It may be newsletters or other notes from people who write newsletters that fall into a certain category, because on Substack you can tag yourself with 3 tags: politics, culture, art, whatever. Maybe I want one tab to just be about art and another to be just about politics. I want a lot of control and a lot of transparency. And I think that's in line with Substack overall pathos, their ideology, their stated kind of values. And I think your point about algorithms is right. That also, feeds into the overall case that Substack has been making for itself. There's Chris Best, the CEO, wrote a little Twitter thread where he said that all social media is going to evolve into a kind of a Substack or into a kind of a TikTok. The difference being one is powered by subscriptions and meaning paid subscriptions, and humans, like you control what's in your feed. And the other is going to be algorithms and ads. So TikTok is incredibly powerful in feeding you what you want to see. You don't know how. It just tracks what you like, what you watch longer for. and so forth. And it just gives you this tailored feed of what you would be into according to the algorithm. It's powerful, but you don't know how it works. You don't
Right.
have a lot of control over it. And the money comes from ads. And Substack can be an alternative to that, where the money comes from your audience, people who decided to pay you money, and the curation of what you're seeing is what you chose. It's under your control. You know how it works, and you can change it if you started to dislike what you're seeing.
Yeah. No, I think control should be a big selling point. Now, Elon Musk recently came out and said, here's our algorithm, it's transparent. Well, apparently that's bullshit. There was a bunch of stuff that you actually couldn't figure out. No, I listened to this podcast on the moderated content podcast, and they brought in an expert who used to work on Twitter, I think. And he said, no, this is very heavily redacted. He's still not telling you how the thing actually works. So in your scenario, this sounds like a great idea. Like you would have, and in theory, you can create multiple feeds, right? You could have as many tabs as you want. For each tab, you open a tab, and there's a menu of things you check, presumably, right? It has to be a finite number of options for this to be practical. You can't get in there and write the code yourself. So one of them, and by the way, this could overlap with what I'm saying about how obviously Substack wants to privilege Substack publishers. That should be part of the game. They want to encourage you to be a Substack publisher. They want to encourage existing publishers with clout to come to Notes. So this could be one way, like one of the check marks could be people with total subscriptions over 20,000 or people with paid subscriptions over 1,000 or whatever. You could have things like that. You could have a lot of things. It has to be a reasonably compact menu of options. I think that's a great idea. So I think we agree, people want to control their social media experience. They're sick of opaque algorithms, and they just are never going to trust them, whoever's doing them. And they're always it's just a sense that you're not in control. It's the worst thing in the world. And so I think they should focus on that. Now on the, I certainly one of the minimal, version of this is, the ability to have a tab that's just like individual people I have selected that I am following on Notes, regardless. I may or may not be subscribing to their newsletters, but these are people I want to follow on Notes, period. We think apparently maybe that functionality exists. Like you click on someone's name, then go to and then after clicking on the name, go to the 3 dots and click on the 3 dots. We think if you click something, then they will start showing up in some feed. But even that feed won't be just people you're following, right? Then they will be in your home feed or something, we think. And
I'm not totally sure in this, but I think so. I think they show up in your home feed instead of subscribed feed.
Yeah. So it needs to be much clearer and simple. Yeah. So now before, at some point in this conversation, I want to talk about the challenge of building kind of a culture, like an ethos, like what's considered good behavior. And maybe that's a hopeless task. But I think if you're ever going to do it, you do it early in the evolution of a given social media platform. And so I want to get to that. But why don't, before I do, and that's not unrelated to this. I mean, a lot of these things can encourage or discourage good behavior. Like I said, I really think maybe you shouldn't know who is following you or how many followers you have. Think about it. Might be a good idea. Because for one thing, it makes it easier for people to control their experience. One reason, like on Twitter, you don't want to unfollow somebody it's a little awkward. So you've got the mute thing. You can follow them, but mute them. That's one approach. But anyway, there's a lot of considerations. Anyway, I'll get back to the culture issue and even the interaction of kind of structure, interface structure and culture. But why don't you talk some more about things you were advocating in your piece because for one thing, you have a lot of experience being Russian. You naturally have a lot of experience with Telegram. Apparently, that's like, obligatory if you're Russian. And I don't. I mean, you're the only person I've ever communicated with on Telegram, actually.
Right.
So if you want to talk about a different part of your manifesto, go ahead. But at some point, you should get to the Telegram part, I think.
Sure. Telegram is part of my manifesto. So I should give a little background. So Telegram is extremely popular in Russia. It's a messenger first. So this is like, if I meet somebody here in Yerevan and want to exchange numbers, we don't exchange phone numbers. We exchange Telegram handles or phone number that's connected to Telegram. Telegram did something similar to Substack, to what Substack did in the English-speaking world, I think, which is like reviving the blogosphere. Blogs were kind of going away, and Substack some years earlier, or Telegram some years earlier than Substack, revived blogs in Russia, in a sense, by bringing them into your messenger. So on Telegram, you have these things called channels, which are very similar to notes. And, Substack brought blogs into your email inbox. Everybody has an email. And now you have a way to subscribe to people and get their writing in your email. Telegram did that with the messenger. You already have Telegram because this is the popular messenger. And you can subscribe to these channels and get people's writing right there in the app that you're already using. It's a different feel from what blogs used to be and what newsletters are now, because it is in a messenger. There's a different cadence to it. It's usually shorter writing, more frequent. And it became this huge cultural thing. Everybody and their sister have a channel. It's very easy to start one. The interface is very simple. It's like you're writing a message to your friend, but instead you're writing to some audience that you might have amassed. And another, I think, similarity between Substack and Telegram is this avoidance of the algorithm. So on Telegram, there is no I've seen some websites that have a directory of different channels, but they never took off. That became a thing. Instead, the way it works is you subscribe to a few that you found, and then it's very easy to forward a message either from a chat that you're in or a private chat or a channel. It's the same interface. So you're just in this chat-like feed. Any message you want to forward, you click on it and you forward either to a chat or a group chat or to DMs with somebody that you're having.
Any message of your own, you mean? Any message you've written, or even a message that you've received?
Anything. Somebody sent you something, or you read something in this channel and you forwarded. And this is like a supercharged word of mouth thing, right? So it's the same as telling to somebody in a private conversation, I read this thing, but here it's very easy technologically. And that's how these things grow. So people that I know, I don't know, I don't have data on whether this is the prevalent kind of way of doing things, but I myself and people I know don't subscribe to a ton of channels. But it so happens that, if I forward some, piece of news or meme or something to a friend, it's likely that they've already seen it. Or if I didn't forward it, in the morning to them, they might have forwarded later in the day, even though we subscribe to different channels. Because there's this ease of forwarding, things spread. There's a whole conversation that somebody like you might want to have about whether this is a good or a bad thing. Does it create echo chambers? All these kinds of things. But it does, it's the same dynamic that used to exist in all human societies, where information spreads through people sharing it, deciding to tell something about something. But
Right.
here it's just this ease of technologically advanced communication that
Well,
kind of supercharges this dynamic.
I mean, doesn't a certain amount of that happen on like Twitter? I mean, if there's a subject that becomes prominent among the kinds of people I talk to on Twitter, it will come to my attention if I'm on Twitter. And, through retweeting mainly or discussing it and the discussion being whatever, it's not through forwarding. But so it's a different dynamic, but doesn't it have to some extent the same outcome?
I mean, sure, but I think the difference in the dynamic is important because it's not that you see it in some feed that is just filled with all kinds of different stuff.
Wow.
Some of it is retweeted, some of it. This is somebody you know forwarded this thing to you specifically. So it's just a different, I haven't thought out the consequences of these differences, but it is a different thing.
Okay. So the individual communications are much more targeted than on Twitter, but the efficiency is so great that you still wind up becoming aware of a bunch of stuff that on Twitter you become aware of through something that's a little closer to broadcasting than private communication. Okay.
Yeah. And I guess, it only can work. Like the reason that this is working so well for Telegram is because it's very prevalent. Again, this is a messenger first, and people just have it so that they can talk to their friends and their relatives and whatnot.
Sure.
And then this broadcasting thing is inserted into it, which Substack doesn't have yet. But I think Substack can get to the similar place from a different direction. So it doesn't have this huge user base in terms of people who are just using it for personal communication. But it has these writers, and if you want to follow these writers, you go to Substack. And so Substack has a chat, works differently. I think it would work better if it became something more similar to Telegram or really just any messenger app. So what I want to see is just an endless stream of messages, a group chat, the way you have them on WhatsApp and whatever, iMessage, I think. And then, you're entering this dynamic from a different direction. So it's, receiving content first, but then you introduce this exchange of messages, DMs and whatnot, easy forwarding, sharing stuff with specific people you want to share it. And then you'll end up with these group chats. You'll end up with private conversations that you're having on Substack. There are a lot of people I know would not have been using Facebook or the Russian analog VK, short for Vkontakte, if not for two people who are still fucking there, right? You don't want to use this service, but there are a couple of people with whom this is your channel of communication, so you kind of stay. This is a way to kind of keep people on your platform, apart from other things. If you start talking with somebody on the Substack app, then this is where you're talking to them. And then this number of people with whom you choose to communicate over on Substack can grow, and it can become this web of different ongoing conversations that you're having on this platform.
So give me an example. Suppose I'm on Substack Notes. In your ideal world, after Substack has put Nikita in charge of interface design, give me an example of something I want to do. I might want to do once I realize I can do it, that I can't do now, that I would be able to do. Okay. Just as a notes user, I'm on Notes. What's the thing you would like me to be able to do?
So if we're staying in the topic that we were talking about just now, the first thing is a very easy way to share any kind of Substack content in any other sort of Substack channel, meaning a newsletter. I can restack this as you can do this already. You read the newsletter, you click on a button, it becomes a note of yours. You reposted this newsletter, this post in a newsletter on Substack Notes. I want every combination to be possible. I can share some note as a newsletter post of mine. I can share somebody's newsletter post as a newsletter post of mine or as a note, or forward it to a specific person, or forward it to a group chat that I have. DMs are not a part of this yet, though I think they want to develop this. I don't know what their plans for chat is. My view is the interface needs to be rethought. As I said, I don't think this, each message that you post as the owner of the chat becomes a thread. Like this is a thread starter, and all the comments to that become comments to that specific thread. So it's another click to go there. And right now, if you reply to a comment, a specific comment, and that's another thread, which I think creates a mess. So in the post that you alluded to in the beginning of the conversation, I have a screenshot from Bill Bishop's chat. The entire thread is 14 comments, but like 5 of them are responses to a different comment. So now to read 14 comments, which would be very easy if they were just on the same screen, I just scroll through, it's a couple of screens. Instead, now I need to do like 10 extra clicks. I need to click on each thread that is a response to somebody's comment. Then after seeing that, I need to go back. Then I click on another one. So to read 14 comments, I need to do 10 clicks. I think that's very messy. And it's a different kind of conversation. So if you have this just, imagine again, WhatsApp or whatever, if you have this like stream of messages without an end, without a structure, then it's a lower barrier to entry. Like if you join somebody's chat, you just seen people are posting things, you might post as well. If in order to post a thing, you need to either respond to a specific thing that's already there, or you start your own thread, but it's like, hey, why don't we have a conversation about what I've got to say? Then, you're turning the attention of people towards you, and they might pay attention or might get annoyed. It's a different social dynamic. If it's just like an ongoing conversation with many people involved, and you just chip in, you make write a one-liner, it's easier to become a participant of such a conversation. It's a different social dynamic that I think would be great to have on Substack. And also, the other option, the way chat works now, is kind of how notes are already. So the difference between the two features the difference is not obvious. And I've seen a lot of comments on notes to that extent. Like somebody joined, like, so how do I decide whether I should start a thread on chat or write a note? Really? It's not clear. And Substack's response is chat is for subscribers. Notes is a more of a shared conversation. I forget if we already mentioned this in this chat, but I don't think that makes sense, because if that is the difference, then that should be the difference. A note for subscribers only, or a note for public conversation. That's a visibility setting on notes. That's not a different feature. That's not a different kind of a conversation. It's if that's the difference, then let me choose to make that difference to a specific note, or even create 2 different note channels. Sort of like I have notes that go just to subscribers. I have notes that go to everybody. But like structurally, it's the same thing. So it shouldn't be a whole different feature with slightly different interface. That's just confusing to me.
So you want a very fluid experience where you can kind of flow into a lot of different things relatively easily, it sounds like. And I should say, I think, I'm less hung up on that. And it's partly a generational thing. It's like, I'm still having trouble wrapping around my mind around the fact that this isn't a physical object where I open the pages and look at the people content, But it's also the fact that you are. Look, I know a number of people your age. You are particularly facile, like technologically. I've had a lot of experience with you talking things through, and you managing to pay attention to everything I'm doing, while also like, I don't know, writing software, whatever the hell it is you're doing on your keyboard while you're managing to stay engaged in a conversation. So, different things, for different people. It also, well, it's a lot of things. It's also, we all use our newsletters in different ways. I'm a little more old
Sure.
school. It for me is more of a publishing experience than a communication experience. Although, I look at comments and I engage sometimes, but it's still, some is generational. Some is just different cognitive styles. I don't think if I'd been born the year you were born, I still wouldn't be as facile as you are with interfaces and stuff. But
Well, the broader point, I guess, is there are a bunch of things on Substack. It should be intuitively clear when I use which function and how they all work together. That's the broad point. Then you can develop that further into a bunch of different ways to go about it. But I shouldn't ask people in notes, wait, so how are notes different from chat? How do I do this? It all should be very intuitive.
Of course, most people who go to notes have no experience with chat, right? I mean, that's the hope, is that a bunch of people will show up at notes and that's going to draw them into the Substack ecosystem. That's one of the big hopes. And so that may not, be a question that occurs to everyone. I mean, I will say, in terms of the overlap of our obsessions, I think the other thing you talked about, where you can create as many tabs as you want and go through a checklist and prescribe the characteristics of a given tab, I think that's genius level stuff. And Substack should really pay attention to it, because that's a real differentiator. I mean, I haven't been on Facebook in years, but I don't think Facebook offers you anything like that. I know Twitter doesn't. Now, Twitter does have lists, I will say. I just realized while you and I were talking that, when people on Twitter say, they used to say it more because it was a little less clear what you could do. When they say, what if I just want to follow people I want to follow? Actually, you could always just start a list and do that, I suppose, on Twitter. So there is a certain degree of customization on Twitter. Of course, the fact is that on Twitter, you can also just use the following tab, which I assume works as advertised. But I think that's really, and I think one of the big selling points is, on this social media platform, you control your experience. There isn't any mysterious algorithm at all, period. And I know there's a temptation. I know there's a temptation if you're running this to, because look, there are ways they can use an algorithm to generate more paid subscribers for newsletters. I'm sure that's possible. But I really would advise resisting the temptation and just say, we're fundamentally different. I think that's the way you get a big influx of people and turn this into a huge thing. It's part of the way. Controlling your strength. And the thing I'm obsessed over, which is just make it clear how I can follow individual people and then have a vertical where that's all I see. That is a subset of this larger concern about control of your experience. And
I agree. And I think that's perfectly in line with what Substack has been saying from day first. They were saying, we are trying to develop a tool where readers and writers are in charge. We just are trying to make it easy. So that just follows, I think, from the premise of Substack.
Now, well, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, there is now an algorithm at work on Substack Notes. Is that the home page, the home vertical includes algorithmically generated content?
My understanding, it's not the case in the sense in which algorithms work on other media. I don't have clarity on this. I think because they've been changing it. They're trying to figure it out and are tweaking it. But my understanding is whatever the algorithm is, it's specific. It's not like the number of likes or comments is what influences what you'll see there. It's more like it's people who you subscribe to. It's also people that are recommended by people who you subscribe to. It's also notes that have gotten a response from somebody that you subscribe to. Like it's you can write it out in a few
Yeah.
sentences, and that's how it works. It's not a mysterious, AI thing. It works.
That last one makes no sense to me. And I think, notes that have been responded to by somebody, and I think that explains somebody who keeps showing up on Substack notes, whom I'm really not interested in. But it should be, completely transparent. And even that when you say recommended by somebody you subscribe to, that means recommended by somebody. I have two questions. That means recommended by somebody whose newsletter you subscribe to, A, and B, what does recommended mean? You mean their newsletter is recommended? I see. Like I recommend your newsletter. You recommend mine. So that's what
right.
that means.
That's right.
Okay. Well, again, I understand that Substack it's a company, and I think it's a good company, and I'm happy to to benefit from it. And obviously, at the forefront of their minds is newsletter subscription. Well, at the very forefront is paid newsletter subscriptions, because if they don't have those, they have to go out of business. But what feeds into that is newsletter subscriptions, period. So they're always thinking about that, and I get that. But I would argue for restraining the impulse to focus on that as the criteria for all kinds of things at Substack notes, at the expense of just user experience and getting people to love the thing. And that's all I'll say about that. So do you want to say more about your manifesto before I say a little bit about culture?
Well, I guess I should just reiterate a larger point behind all of this, which actually I think is a segue to the culture conversation. So the kind of meta point that I was making in this thing is like, here are suggestions that I have. I think we should all have suggestions that we have. I think there should be a sustained conversation between users and the owners of the platform about how it should develop. And through that, you develop culture. You want this conversation about what's good about social media and what's bad about social media to be ongoing and to have a little bit of tension. If Substack starts doing things that users don't like, the user should speak out and should be listened to. And there should be some kind of, you can institutionalize it in some way, or you may not. But I want there to be this continuous dialogue about what we're trying to do here, what is a good internet versus a bad internet, and how we're, making adjustments so that we end up in a good version.
Yeah. And I will say, I think, the founders and the other people at Substack have been good so far about trying to engage in a conversation about where this is headed.
Yeah.
So on culture, I mean, culture is a very, it's kind of by definition a hard thing to legislate. I do think you can, you can do things. There can, famously, for example, Mastodon chose not to permit the quote tweet because it seems to be used so often for dunking on people. Like it's not a way of communicating with the person you're quote tweeting. It's a way of humiliating them and communicating with your own tribe and building up more followers and so on. So that's an example of something. Now you can quote tweet on Substack. On notes, I think you lose a lot when you don't have quote tweeting. But at the same time, I would like to minimize the downside. I'm a fan of quote tweeting because it can be used for illuminating purposes and to help start a dialogue.
I like it, and I think so. Yeah, there are these intertwining conversations, kind of structure and culture, and I think it's not a given that quote tweets or quote notes have to be used for dunking. I think this is on the writers. This is the responsibility of the users to use this in a good way. I think what the platform can do is, again, this is the broad point, give control to the writers and the readers. Let me be in charge of the space that I'm creating and let the reader be in charge of what gets into their feed. On that, another thing that I advocated in this post is basically using a part of the interface for chat, duplicating it in Notes, which is I want a tab that shows me a list of people I subscribe to and make it easy for me to read a specific person. So I don't need to like find somewhere in the notes or go to my profile and see people I'm following and click on the name there for the feed of notes of that person to show up. I want this menu to be up front. So I go to notes and like the tab on the left is a list of people I subscribe to, and I can click on a specific person and read their thing. This gives me, the reader, more control. It also, I think, just makes sense because unlike Twitter, Notes doesn't have a character limit. And so the feed becomes way more eclectic, and we'll see how it develops over time. But I expect some people to kind of specialize in one-liners, some people in posting images, and some people in writing, 1,000 characters every day. And if that's the feed that I have, it's all of these things mixed together. It's a weird feeling. It's what kind of a mode am I in when I go there? Am I expecting to see a lot of very short stuff? Am I expecting to see longer texts? And if I'm expecting a mixture, that to me is confusing. It kind of pulls me in different directions. There was something else on this topic I wanted to say, but I'm now forgetting it.
Well, let me talk a little about culture, and maybe it'll come to you.
Sure.
Just that, in my ideal world, one kind of difference of attitude, something that would distinguish this from kind of typical Twitter attitude, is when you post something, when you write something, you always kind of have an audience in mind, whether you're thinking about it or not. And this is one of the great challenges of writing, is figuring out, well, who is the audience? Obviously, it's going to be an oversimplification unless you're writing to one person. You have to have this kind of aggregate, theoretical construct in mind. And of course, a lot of bad writing comes from just not doing a good job of this exercise, like not understanding who your audience is, what they do and don't know, and so on. But I digress. I think there's, if you pay attention, like you're on Twitter or something, I think you'll notice that, okay, here's the audience I have in mind. And way too often, I think the audience you have in mind with Twitter is the people who already agree with you, right? And I think that's partly because Twitter incentivizes that. Now, because if you immediately get a bunch of likes, who are you going to get a bunch of likes from? Immediately, you're going to get a bunch of likes from people who don't even have to really process what you're saying. They get the vibe. They also hate Donald Trump, or they also hate Joe Biden. That's all they need. They may take a closer look and retweet. And to some extent, that's intrinsic in a platform that has likes and retweets, right? Actually, no, it's intrinsic. Remember, at one point in Twitter, if I recall correctly, likes gave you no amplification of visibility. It was just retweets. Liking something was almost a way of signaling to the person that you liked it. It was almost private communication because it didn't amplify the thing algorithmically. There was retweeting. And even in that system, obviously, there's some tribalizing tendencies, right? What I've just described, like, let me preach to the choir, preach to the converted, that's going to work in an environment where there's just retweeting. On the other hand, it's going to work even more if they start using likes for algorithmic amplification. So this is an example of something where the structure of the social media site can influence the mindset. But you're never, so long as there is sharing, which there has to be on a social media platform, whether you call it a retweet or a restack, or it's something else where you forward it to 3 people, there's going to be a kind of a temptation to preach to the converted. And in my ideal world, we would all resist that temptation. But this is also why I say maybe we shouldn't know how many followers we have, because that's another thing that encourages you to do inflammatory tribal stuff. That's the way you get your follower count up. I mean, even if you do this careful thing that is aimed at convincing people in the other tribe, best case is they go, hey, maybe this guy's got a point and he's not a total asshole. They're probably not going to follow you. So long as follower is a big target of your follower count is a big target, I think that's probably going to be a bad thing. But, there's things you can do. Anyway, in my ideal world, we don't think, okay, I just want to impress the people who already agree with me, or give them new rhetorical ammunition that they can use in further amplifying our talking points. In my ideal world, you imagine in your head, there are some people who may not agree with you, but if you don't sound like an asshole, they'll give you a respectful hearing. And, to some extent, if that is ever to become prevalent as a mindset, it has to be kind of a cultural thing that is reinforced normatively, right? Like, and that includes both positive and negative reinforcement. It includes saying, I really respect this person, just saying it to other people. I respect this person, saying it where they can hear it, because that's positive reinforcement. Like, this is a very impressive, note. Like, it's not tribal. They're making good points. They're doing it civilly. So you give them positive reinforcement. There's also negative reinforcement. I mean, that has a place in any culture where you shower disdain on, stigma. I think stigma is mainly misused to inhibit legitimate speech, or largely misused. Like, if you say, I think maybe expanding NATO wasn't a great idea, and somebody calls you a Putin apologist, that's misusing stigma to inhibit. And there are examples on the other side of the argument as well. There's always stigma can be used, from either side of any argument, but that's a misuse of stigma. But, it's like, that guy's an asshole because he stole my money. No, that's a good use of stigma. That guy's a thief. A thief is a bad thing. That's a good use of stigma. And I also think it would be good if, it's tricky to get in the game of denunciation, but if sometimes you signal disapproval from just a cheap tribal note. I mean, I was thinking, like, could it be that on Substack notes, a form of derogating someone becomes saying that's Twitter-like behavior? Like, like,
I can see that.
I mean,
I can see
that's
that.
That's a form of tribalism I can get behind. It is like you say, it's not something I'd see on Twitter. Come on. Well, let's have an honest conversation here. I mean, acknowledge the strong points that are being made by the other team, and and argue forthrightly. So I would like to turn, use various forms of the word Twitter as a way to stigmatize people.
I think I've seen that a little bit during the pilot.
Let's make it happen.
Yeah.
This is Twitter-like.
Okay, so I have a few responses to this. So one is the thing I already mentioned. If there is a way for me to navigate through specific things that I subscribe, specific like channels of nodes that I subscribe to, and the owner of that channel has capacity to ban people, delete comments, etc., I think that could be a good thing in the realm of what you're talking about, which is, again, like, I want to have control, and I want to be able to enforce my rules for conducting ourselves within my little channel, right? So you might start subscribing to those where a good conversation is happening, not subscribe to others. Obviously, there's going to be the opposite as well, but at least I want to be able to preserve my little garden. That's one thing. And then kind of an opposite of that, so in thinking about how culture develops, I think one way is through public conversation between people with audiences that know what a good conversation is. So and Twitter is bad at this, partly because of the character limit, partly because of the way a conversation is structured. Like, it's not threaded, and it's difficult to navigate. But like, I've never seen a really good substantive discussion on Substack that is not also doesn't also have this mess of comments attached to it. On Substack, because there's no character limit and the interface is cleaner and easier to navigate, you can have that. And then it is on the users, on the writers and the commenters to model what a good conversation is. So you can engage with somebody you disagree on about whatever NATO expansion, and you do it civilly. And, you like comments from other people who chime in that are in the spirit of a good conversation, and you ignore those that are not. And through that, you encourage a certain way of speaking.
Uh-huh.
That I think can be a good thing. And then the third thing I would just wanted to quickly mention is, like, a lot of how a certain social network works is determined to some extent by the way it's set up. That's not all. There's also just things that emerge naturally through how people that are there early do this, how people who come later do this, just through a natural kind of exchange. And my example for this is, so the Russian social network VK, which is short for Vkontakte, which means in contact. At first, that was a complete clone of Facebook. Just completely stole the thing and did, with slight adjustment, a version of it on the Russian internet. But even then, Facebook and Vkontakte had different audiences, and different ways of speaking emerged. Facebook had more like Western-oriented people because it is a Western, product, and the interface was in English at first, and so forth. Vkontakte early on, their first kind of influx of people were students. So you would have like groups for your, you go to university, your class is there, and that's how you build a network there. Over time, it changed. It's not like Facebook. It's not exactly like Facebook anymore. And the audiences further diverted. But early on, it was the same thing, just with different audiences. And they were talking to each other differently. And every social network has its own, you think of Twitter, you know how people talk on Twitter. You think of Facebook, that it's slightly different there. And some of it is just because it kind of happened that way. Like the people who went there early on talk to each other this way. And so now with Substack, with notes, we're in the early stages, and what culture we establish early on is going to have a major influence of how this culture is going to look down the road. So I think a lot of it is on the users to behave, basically.
Yeah. A couple of thoughts. One, just quickly, as it just occurred to me, a thing I've been wondering with Substack forever, and a lot of people have, is like, one version of this is the kind of a group subscription model where, maybe me and 5 newsletter publishers who have something in common in terms of culture or ethos or something, maybe ideology, get together and they offer a subscription that costs less than it would to subscribe to newsletters independently. There's that. But it just,
I think they
just
have it.
Do they have that now?
I think so. You can issue a discount for a group subscription.
Okay, I didn't realize that. But what I was just thinking and listening to you was, I wonder if groups of people, maybe groups of newsletter publishers at first, could form communities of discussion collectively, with certain kind of rules that are explicit or implicit. But anyway, that aside, let me make sure one thing you're I guess you're saying that I now realize is that the ability of a newsletter publisher to kind of control their comment section is
Mm-hmm.
something you would like to import to some extent to notes. Like if you start a conversation, you should have more control over it than you have on, say, Twitter. Now on Twitter, if you view the replies to your tweet as the conversation space, you can block individual people. I don't know how easy it is to do any of that retroactively, though. I don't know. I don't think you can't like delete comments from somebody just because you don't because they use profanity or whatever you don't like. Um, so anyway, I now see why some of the things you're saying. A lot of things you're saying would be challenging to the people at Substack, and one of them is this whole question of, well, how much, this is kind of a radical idea. If you can create this space on a social media platform that you have godlike control over, right? It's that would be kind of a new thing for most of us, at least for the platforms where we're, if what you're familiar with is like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, whatever, that would be kind of a new thing, right?
I guess so. Yeah.
But it's an interesting idea. I mean, well, go ahead.
So this is a separate thing I wanted to bring up, which is more of a question to you. So Twitter, in my understanding, has a kind of an outsized influence on the culture as compared to its user base. And my understanding is this is because there are a lot of journalists there. And there are a lot of,
I mean, high-powered academics, entrepreneurs,
celebrities,
and entertainment people. Yeah, it's the elite. Facebook is grassroots. Twitter is elite. And that's one reason, by the way, people say, well, Twitter doesn't bring me that much traffic. Well, that doesn't mean it's not helping you, because there may be some word of mouth among elites that is helping you in ways you don't understand. But go ahead.
So that is partly just to underline the kind of audience you have, the kind of user base you have makes a difference. But the other thing is, I wonder what is different about Substack in its user base. And I think there is something. So Substack, people, there are a lot of journalists who left not just Twitter, but their jobs to start a newsletter at Substack, to build a little business of their own, which they control. And there's something that goes with it culturally. So you're attracting kind of entrepreneurial people who want control over their email list, which something should be underlined as well. And it's kind of in tension with this idea of following but not subscribing to the email. I think a big selling point of Substacks is you control the email list. So if at some point you decide that Substack is not going the direction you wanted,
right,
you can just take your subscribers with you and go wherever you want. And you can even take your financial relationships with them.
That's right.
Export the Stripe contracts and go wherever you want. If you can follow on Notes, but not subscribe to somebody's newsletter, how do you take those people with you? That is a difficult challenge that I know that people at Substack are aware of, and they're trying to figure it out. But I think we shouldn't lose this idea of, I can take my people and go somewhere else if I don't like this anymore. But back to my original point, Substack attracts certain kinds of people. One kind of such people is entrepreneurial writer, artist, whatever, who want to build their own community, their own subscriber base, establish ways things are done in the comment section, and so forth. And that seems to me to empower this kind of ownership of the culture. Like if you have these people who left other places because they were not happy being edited or with the algorithm, were censored, shadow banned, etc., these people will want to do their thing their way. And I think that gives a certain impotence to, that's not the word, impetus, to...
Those are different words.
to build a culture that you want to build around yourself.
Yeah.
And then, start collaborating, networking, and all that. But it starts with the individual wanting to do their thing their way.
Yeah. Now, so let me say a few things. First of all, on the elite point, this gets back to a huge advantage that Substack Notes has over any other kind of upstart social media platform. Okay. The fact that they now have a lot of people publishing newsletters, many of them with non-trivial followings, some of them with huge followings, means they have all these elites in a lot of spaces, not just, journalists. They have, they have novelists, they have artists, they have, that's an incredible.
Patti Smith, of
What's
all
that?
people. Patti Smith, of all people.
Patti Smith has a newsletter?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like,
does.
It's like Seymour Hirsch, Patti Smith. Oh, no, I saw Mark Cuban on Substack Notes this morning. The owner of the, I was wearing my, I had a Mavericks thing on earlier. Anyway, yeah, it's a huge advantage. And again, this gets back to one point I was making, like, okay, so apparently the bestseller column that's still on my version of Substack Notes is no longer there. Okay, but I do think and I'm sure they're thinking about this. You want to make the following people have built up with their newsletters an asset on Substack Notes. And I speak, from a position of someone who I never had a blue check on Twitter, and don't get me started on that particular, don't lead, I don't want to get into grievance territory, but I didn't try that. I tried way too late. I tried once. It didn't, apparently I don't meet their criteria, but I think, there should, it's in Substack's interest to have a version of that rewards people that do what Substack has to reward people for doing, which is have newsletters, including ideally paid newsletters. That's the business they're in. And they have to, so, okay, the bestsellers, I think that column is a great idea. Personally, maybe don't call it bestseller, call it something. But the idea that they're replacing the blue check binary hierarchy with a more finely graded hierarchy that rewards people who build up big followings on Substack, and maybe it should include unpaid subscription numbers, whatever. I think that's something that's good and that they shouldn't lose. But in any event, the point I want to make is one reason I think this conversation is worth having is Substack Notes has huge potential, and a primary reason is that they've got this base of elites, which I don't mean in like a snobby sense. I mean it the way sociologists use the term elites. It's just a demographic designation of people who are have certain levels of accomplishment in certain job descriptions and so on. But
influence,
yeah, and so there's that. The thing about being able to take with you the followers you built up on a social media platform to other social media platforms, there's a reason social media platforms don't do that.
Sure.
It's not crazy. The way Instagram got started was Twitter used to allow, their API used to allow you to just go there and say, well, show me who all of Bob Wright's followers are. Oh, we'll just move those over to Instagram. Now Bob can move over to Instagram and have this huge following. Well, no social media platform in their right mind can permit that. I mean, in a better world, they might be able to, but obviously, if you are, a company, your stockholders, if it's publicly held or whatever, it's not in the company's interest to permit that. So that's kind of a big ask. And I think Substack should be applauded for making it so easy for newsletter publishers. As you said, you can take both your subscriber base and your financial relationships to another platform. Now, that reminds me, like, one thing Substack Notes, I think, is going to accomplish if it succeeds, and I think the Substack app has accomplished some of this. Is like, if you ask, well, why shouldn't I just go to some other platform other than Substack? For a while, I don't think there were a lot of really powerful answers to that, but there are increasingly. And one of them is Note. Is like, we have Notes. The upstart newsletter
Yep.
company does it. We have an app, and I'm
Yep.
starting to get non-trivial traffic from my Substack app and to my newsletter. And so, that's what they're building here. It's smart, and I hope it works. The one last thing I want to say that just what you were saying kind of triggered, and in a way, it's just reinforcing. In a way, it gets back to my original point uh, about followers, making it easy to follow people. Substack's original instinct was, you know, it, instead of it saying, do you want to follow this person? It will say, do you want to subscribe to their newsletter? It's fine. It can say that if you want. But you got to understand, not that many people, there's a limit on how many newsletters, even if they're free, anybody wants to subscribe
Totally.
to. I understand the impulse, but the reason I think the following option makes sense, which I think now exists and it now kind of exists and didn't exist. I'm not clear, but I think they had to be persuaded to make it exist, even to the extent that it exists. And now I just want to say this is, again, it's part of a much larger thing, which once I started thinking of this as a very fluid place, the way you want it to be, I just think one way to put it is, sure, the kind of positive reinforcement Substack would most like from this is people immediately subscribe to a bunch of newsletters. But I think maybe in the long run, the better way to think of it is just, it's a place where people discover people they like to communicate with and they like to hear from. And many of those people have newsletters. So don't worry. This is going to lead to a lot of subscriptions, but also a lot of people who come here just and don't have newsletters, they're going to
Mm-hmm.
start building up followings and they're going to start newsletters. And
Mm-hmm.
I think they should think of it as just a way of people discovering people they have things in common with, people whose content in one sense or another they respect. And I think the rest will magically happen in a certain sense. I mean, obviously, you have to structure it with the ultimate long-term goal in mind of increasing newsletter subscriptions. But I just think, focus on user experience. It's like, be the opposite of Microsoft. Okay, it's like what is the purpose of Microsoft Windows 11? So far as I can tell, it's worse in every respect than Windows 10 as a user interface. I mean, I exaggerate, but what is the point? Well, apparently the point is that now every time I start my computer, they shove some shit in my face no, Xbox. I've said no to Xbox every day for the last fucking year, okay? It's not going to happen. Stop it. And that's Microsoft's way of thinking. They don't think about user experience at all, so far as I can tell. I'm exaggerating again, but just be a great place to be. Yes, set up the channels that steer people toward becoming Substack publishers, and the rest will magically happen. And do whatever you can to. I mean, honestly, look, the world needs saving. I mean, my whole apocalyptic rant, but the world needs saving. And by the way, I'm watching The Sacrifice by Soviet director Tarkovsky, when he did
Oh, yeah.
Stalker.
Yeah. I haven't seen it, but yeah.
Definitely about the apocalypse. But one of the just big problems is the whole the psychology of tribalism. And I think, whenever it's possible, it'll also be good for the platform. People ultimately don't like the experience of being in the middle of the kind of tribal conflict that they are fueling, even as they don't like it,
Yeah.
So that's my read.
Yeah, I agree. There was something I wanted to say. Shit, I should have been writing those down. Oh, so on the follow versus subscribe and on the evolution of notes, which we will witness, what I expect to happen is a lot of different genres of notes will emerge. And some of them are going to be something you said. There will be people who just write on notes, who don't have a newsletter, and what they're doing on notes is great. And you just want to get that. And if this like visibility setting is introduced, so I can write notes just for subscribe, like followers, I suppose, which could be paid followers, then it alleviates some of the concern about this, like taking the email list and going elsewhere, because you might take the financial relationships. You might have paying subscribers on notes, and you can take those away if you choose to. I think that like this checks and balances kind of thing is important. And so I want to see writers who don't write newsletters, but they're incredible in this genre that they've developed for themselves over at Notes. As a reader, I want these people in my feed, but I do want them to retain a lot of control. And this, I may leave and take people with me is kind of the ultimate point here, which, the fact that they've been doing this so far is already kind of incredible and very laudable. And I'm sure there's a lot of temptation to like take a step away from that, or a few steps away from it, or abandon it at some point completely. But if they stick with it, I think it's an incredible selling point, and it's in line with this whole ideology where putting the writers and the readers in charge, and it's human-centric as opposed to algorithmic-centric. I think as much as they can retain that ethos, that would be for the betterment of the platform and society, if you want to go global.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one thought, you're kind of, one thing you kind of said, I guess, is, I mean, when you think about it, so the idea of monetizing your notes as opposed to monetizing your newsletter, right, is one thing you're throwing out. Then, of course, when you think about it, how clear is the line between a note and a newsletter? I mean, it's like, because obviously if you start doing this thing of, well, I subscribe to their notes feed, and some of it's behind a paywall, the next step is click a button if you want these emailed to you. And then it's like, what is the difference?
That's right. Well, the difference is just how crowded you want your inbox to be. I think that's the main thing.
Yeah.
I will subscribe to way more people on notes than to newsletters, because at some point it just becomes untenable. I use my email for other purposes as well, and I don't want it to be too crowded. And on notes, I go to a specific place where this kind of contact is what I'm getting.
Yeah, it's weird. I wrote a piece for Slate eons ago recommending that Twitter do this thing where it was back when they were going to expand the character count. Anyway, the idea was, no, you leave it at 140 characters, but then you can click for elaboration, and it drops down, and there's more. And then if you want to make it even longer, you click again. But at that point, you go to like another space that's more like, I didn't mention Medium, but it would have been like Medium.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, like, you can monetize that, but what I had in mind was ads. But the point I'm getting to was that, Twitter, the reason Substack is thriving is because, Twitter failed to do the obvious thing, which is to realize, wait a second, we have a ton of aspiring writers using our platform. Is there a way to harness this and help them monetize it? And they never did it. And Elon Musk, in fact, killed the Substack rival that they had bought, Review, and the newsletter, well, the first thing he did. And now I think, I'm happy to say, I think it's almost getting to be too late, because of things like the Substack app, Substack Notes. These are competitive advantages Substack is going to have against any upstart, which I think is, I applaud, partly because I'm on the Substack platform. But anyway, the um, anything else you want to say? I already said that. Um,
I suppose I'll throw in one more thing just to kind of reiterate my point that a lot of this culture, how we behave, is really on us. It's not on Substack to make people talk properly and civilly. They can build structures that would incentivize this or make it easier for you to establish the norms you want.
wow.
But a lot of it is on us. The one of the reasons this is on my mind is there's this guy who died recently in Russia who was he's like a writer and who was a noticeable figure in the kind of early internet in Russia. And I saw a conversation about him, and somebody said, like him or not, he was a major influence in this like budding internet movement early on. And then somebody else said yes, and it was a bad thing because the Russian internet, like on the same platforms, Russians are less civil than English speakers. It's more toxic in the Russian speaking internet part of the internet.
Sure.
And part of the reason for that, I think, is because these early people who were there, when not a lot of people were on the internet, they got into this. It was like you were supposed to be edgy. You were supposed to be cynical. You were supposed to shit talk. Like banter was a thing. There was a kind of a saying. Let me see if I can translate it quickly. Something like, "This is the internet, baby. You can get told to fuck off. Like, just expect this. And don't be too sensitive. This is how we roll." And at the time, like I remember I was a kid, but I remember there was a certain appeal to that. Like, we can, this is free. I can say whatever I want. And if I want to say fuck off, I'm going to say that.
Yeah.
And don't be, a snowflake. And this is a different kind of space. Looking back, that was not a good thing. People did not learn to talk to each other civilly. This embrace of a cynical shit-talking kind of attitude did not lead the Russian internet or Russia more broadly to any good place. And it is important how just we behave ourselves. And if you're successful, if you develop a way of, both being civil and getting respect of your audience and other audience through that, like this is public debate, right? You should develop your skills to be compelling without being, a Donald Trump. And that can be done.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge and it's a fun game as well. And so if more people start playing that game and develop these skills, we'll be in a better place some years down the road.
Yeah, I agree. And it isn't, I think to some extent, you're appealing, to people's, to their better nature. Most people would say they want to make the world a better place. I think this is one way to do it. Doesn't mean you can't fiercely advocate for your position. If anything, I think it means you can, in some cases, more effectively advocate for it. And that's the other thing I'd appeal to is just as a matter of helping your cause. Often, it's toning it down a little can help. And as you know, I'm like obsessive about cognitive empathy. I'm writing a book about it, by which I don't mean feeling people's pain. That's emotional empathy. I just mean trying to understand what's going on in the minds of the people you're dealing with, whether they're enemies, adversaries, allies, frenemies, whatever. And whether they're these people you don't know, but are reading your stuff on social media, and you have to kind of half imagine them. And one problem that happens when you're just thinking of your own tribe, like I'm going to use some, I'm preaching to the choir, is you don't even realize, I think, sometimes how that can lead to misunderstanding. It isn't just that the people on the other tribe don't like what you're saying. They don't even understand it. And they may mistake it. And a good example is sarcasm. And look, I grew up on sarcasm. I love it. I do it, but it's one of the things that translates least well across cultural and tribal and so on lines. And so if you're speaking to, an audience that for all you know is international and trans ideological and everything else, if nothing else, just don't assume that all that sarcasm will not be taken literally, or that the inside jokes that seem obvious to you will be gotten. And there's a place for all of this. And there are harmless forms of sarcasm. It's just a joke everybody can laugh at. And I don't want to sound too much like somebody my age, so I won't. So I'll stop. But
there is, I think, on Substack, again, if they develop this kind of ecosystem that they have in place, the pieces of which they have in place further, and you do have a lot of control over these different channels and corners that you have your chat, maybe you have multiple chats, you have subscriber-only notes and newsletter posts, and you have those that are available to the public. Just like in normal life, you'll have different norms for these different places. Like when I'm talking, when it's just me and my wife in the evening, we talk shit more than if it's us two plus 10 people, some of which we don't really know.
Right.
And if you have these like different kind of thresholds, for different kinds of conversations, this is just subscriber only. This is just the 10 people, other writers that I collaborate with. You have different ways of behaving in these different environments.
Mm-hmm.
And if the writer is empowered by these tools to easily create, delineate between these different conversations, and the way for them to empower one another, you have your broad audience, you convert some of them into your paid subscribers. Mm-hmm. Some of those become the inner circle. You just have this group chat for 10 people who are really on the same page. Then you might be able to enjoy both. You get your sarcasm for the smaller circle. You get your, developing your skills as a public orator in a different place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think the other thing we both agree on is that everyone should subscribe to both the Psychopolitica newsletter and the newsletter. So that's a reasonable note to close on. But I do want to say one other thing. I know I've said this 5 times. I want to say it in a slightly different way. Okay, we're going to end this conversation. At some point today, I'll be at my computer and I'll be deciding where to go. And I can go to Twitter. I can go to Substack Notes. And if Substack Notes has the option I'm advocating to the point of being tiresome about it, where I can just choose people I follow and go to that tab, I'm going to be more likely to go there. I'm going to go there to promote stuff anyway. Okay. But Substack should want me to do more than that there. They should want their publishers to do more than that there. And I would say I'm even more likely to go there if they implement something which will take longer, which is a version of what you're suggesting, which is you can create these tabs and you have a little menu of options. They're not totally on like Twitter lists in the sense you can have multiple lists, but those are one-dimensional. Each one is just a list of people you follow. You're talking about something more nuanced. And I really think they just should imagine a lot of people making this decision. Which platform do I feel like going to? And I'm going to go to the platform where I think I'm going to find a lot of interesting content. And the more control you give people over their environment on that platform, the more that's going to be the case. All right.
Agreed.
So anyway, I think we both wish them well, and that's the reason I want to have this conversation. And also, we should remind people that your post on Substack Notes is called, well, if they go to your feed, Psychopolitica, Nikita.
Psychopolitica.substack.com. It's a newsletter post that I restacked on Notes, and it's called Towards a Substack Civil Society.
Right. By the way, the final question. They don't have handles, right? So like I can't name check you in a way that my note will come to your attention, or can I?
They do on the web, and it's going to come to the app a little later. They're
Well,
working on it.
what is my handle? Is it the name of my newsletter, or what? What is it? What is my what would you write to make sure I see
think
the
it's
note?
your name. I think it's your name. This is also something that they need to figure out. Like right now, I think the relationship between these different entities, the author, the newsletters that the author contributes to, I think that's a little confusing, but I'm sure that's going to be ironed out.
Yeah.
But I think right now the handle is like, if you want to tag me, you start typing my name as opposed to my newsletter.
Okay. Well, there's a lot on their agenda, and they're not a huge company. They got they're lean and mean, so it's going to take a while. But I think they're acting in good faith, and they're paying attention to the feedback. And
I think they're doing a great job.
Yeah.
They're not totally there yet, but they're moving in the right direction and at a good pace.
Yeah. All right. Well, good luck with everything, and we'll see you down the road.
Yeah. Talk to you soon.